unit heading up to the code 3 chase. Suspect was last reported southbound on Highway 99.
Can you give me more info on that call?
Greetings. Welcome to another show of Cop to Corporate. I'm Brian Tuscan, your host, and our special guest today is Avril Eklund, and she started off in a small township police officer, moved up to a larger department, about 65 officers, and then to the AG's office in Pennsylvania with about 200 agents doing all kinds of investigative work. She took an early retirement because the AG's office allowed you to retire at 10 years at a limited pension and decided to test the corporate world. She currently works for one of the largest software code repositories with over 31 million people, GitHub, using it, and then previously worked for a large real estate corporation called WeWork. Avril will tell you her story, her journey, what took her from the small departments all the way up to a major corporation on this next episode of Cop to Corporate. Avril, please tell us your story, first starting off with law enforcement.
Hi, Brian. It's great to talk to you today. So about 20 years ago now, 21 years ago now, I put myself through the police academy. My grandfather had to help me pay for it because I had just graduated college and had no money. In Pennsylvania, you could pay for yourself to go through the police academy, and kind of gives you a little bit of street cred when you start applying for police departments. So put myself through the police academy, was hired by my first small, as you said, police department that was in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. Spent about a year there, left there and moved to a police department that was a little bit bigger and closer to home where I grew up in Bucks County, out on the other side of Philadelphia. Worked there for about 5 years, just over 5 years. I did mostly patrol. While I was there, I was fortunate they were looking for somebody to buy drugs undercover, and turns out I was pretty good at that. So I spent a lot of my time, overtime, thankfully, buying drugs. I'd work patrol during my shift, go back to the locker room, get changed, put on normal clothes, and then go out and buy crack. Or heroin was just starting to become a thing at the time. Got pretty good at buying drugs, made kind of a reputation for myself. One that my mom would probably not approve of if she knew that that's what I was good at. But got pretty good at buying drugs, got county sworn countywide as a special detective. So I could go anywhere within the county I worked in and buy drugs. From there, my reputation continued to grow, and I was actually recruited by the Attorney General's office in Pennsylvania to join as a narcotics agent. So I left after 5 years, left my police department, went to the Attorney General's office as a narcotics agent, spent 5 years as a narcotics agent working mid to high level drug cases. And then we got a new Attorney General that was looking to build an intelligence unit within the statewide Attorney General's office. We didn't really have one at the time. I had gone back to get my master's degree because I wanted something more than just buying drugs forever and working drug cases. So I actually went to St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia and started my master's program in intelligence analysis and executive management. Right around the same time as when the new Attorney General came and wanted to build the Intel unit. So they were looking for a volunteer to start working on that. And I raised my hand, offered to build an Intel unit, and then spent the next 5 years building an award-winning Intel unit it was the first real intelligence function within the Attorney General's office. We went on to win awards for it. It was pretty cool. It was a pretty cool experience. The end of that, within the intelligence unit, I rose up through the ranks. So I went from being a narcotics agent to a special agent to a senior supervisory, eventually a senior supervisory special agent, which is the highest non-lawyer position within the Attorney General's office, other than, like the chiefs. Took me out of the union because it wasn't the first line supervisors were still union. I had moved up out of the union with that position. So I knew that when the Attorney General left, I might have to look for something else. So about 6 months before the end of her term, I started kind of putting feelers out and getting an idea of what was out there in the universe to do. I'm not one to kind of put my fate in the hands of others, so I wanted to be proactive about it. Started looking, started trying to figure out how all these crazy skills I had learned, both on the narcotics side and the police department side, and then building this intelligence unit, all the networking skills that I developed there, meeting with intel functions for federal agencies, and collaborating with all different entities across both within Pennsylvania and across the country, really. How would that apply to the private sector? So spent a little bit of time figuring that out, and then started blasting applications out there.
Well,
and,
tell me, Avril, how did that process work for you? Did you get on LinkedIn? Did you just apply through directly with the company? How were you able to get eyes on your resume? Can you help our listeners with that?
Sure. That was it ended up being kind of crazy. So I was looking, I thought I would be a cop forever, really. I didn't think I would ever leave law enforcement. These opportunities kept presenting themselves, and that moved me forward within the Attorney General's office until I got to the point that I wasn't in the union. And then I was like, uh-oh, what did I kind of do? Now I'm kind of at the will of this political office, and we know somebody else is probably going to get elected next term. So like, what am I going to do about that? So I had to kind of in short order figure out what to make my resume look like. And I think I made a lot of the mistakes probably a lot of people coming out of law enforcement do, where I had it very like cop focused. Like I was on these special teams, and this is, these are the little awards I've gotten and things like that, rather than really figuring out how the skills I had learned applied to the private sector. So the first bunch of resumes, I just, went on Indeed and websites like that, looked for jobs and applied with this one stock resume that listed all these awesome things I did as a police officer, before I finally realized that nobody really cares about what I did as a police officer. They want to know about how do these skills transfer to the private sector? How does my ability to, undercover skills, walk in a room and be able to read that room pretty quickly and figure out what's going on, and who do you need to talk to? Who are the people, who are the players in the room? Who are the quiet people in the room, and what are they looking for? And that kind of, those kind of skills, how do they transfer over? Like, we know what we do, but I also found that a lot of people potentially looking at my resume, they have all different ideas of what cops do, right? They don't, depending on what their interaction with police has been, they don't know if you've just done patrol, or if you've written criminal affidavits, or do you serve warrants, or what does an undercover do? Like, they don't really know. They generally, people's opinions of what cops do are formed by, I think, a lot of what they see on TV, or what limited interactions they might have with police. So once I realized that my resume really wasn't working, I had to figure out how to kind of basically entirely redo it into language that people without law enforcement experience would understand and would be able to relate to, and see how it applied to the jobs that I was looking for. Then I went on LinkedIn next, when I wasn't really getting anywhere. I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, man, I'm sending all these applications out. Like, what am I not doing? Like, I fixed the wording now. I realized that problem and I've corrected it, and I'm still not getting anywhere. So I found WeWork was actually, I found their job description on Indeed, and I thought it was a scam at first, because I'm like, there's no way this is like a real company. Like, it was so out there. It was just the job description itself. It was all about building community and loving each other and all this stuff. I'm like, what kind of company is this? So I did a little bit of, used my Intel background to do a little bit of online research, and turned out it was a real company. I'm like, all right, well, this sounds amazing. It sounds like, I didn't really want to be wearing a suit to work and stuff like that. So I'm like, it's staying with my plain clothes theme that I've been in for the last 10 years. I could wear jeans to work. I reached out to, I'm like, this is the job I want. This sounds perfect. The posting was to, they were building out their global security team. It was working for their head of global security, building out the physical security operations and investigations and intel components. So I'm like, all right, it's right up my alley. I've got the investigative experience. I've got the intel experience. I'm like, now how do I get past this part where like nobody seems to respond to the application you send in or my resume? So I'm like, whatever. I paid the $30 for LinkedIn Premium, and I sent a LinkedIn message right to the head of global security. He wrote back within like 2 hours asking for my phone number, called me up. He's like, I want you to come to New York. He's like, can you be on a train, in like whatever, next couple days, can you come up here? I want to meet you. I said, absolutely. So it actually worked. I was super skeptical that any head of global security would respond to a LinkedIn message, but went up there, met with the head of global security at the time. We hit it off, went back maybe a week later to start doing like the formal interview process. And just went from there.
Avril, your point of the network on LinkedIn, and you just did what we or in sales would call cold calling, right? You didn't know who this head of security was. And all of the interviews I've had so far, people bring up the power of LinkedIn and networking. And it's how you do it too, but what you bring to the table. When I interviewed Des Smith, former NYPD detective who built a multi-million-dollar corporation from the ground up, he spoke about cops always undervaluing themselves, right? Or underrating their value. And what you just explained is articulating the work that you have done and the experiences that you've had correctly on a resume. So when the head of security saw what you had, he knew this is exactly the person I need in the skill set. And LinkedIn brought you together. And so once you got the job offer, walk me through the butterflies that you had when you turned in or retired, because it's a huge step. Once you turn in your badge, I mean, it's almost permanent, right? Because if you're going to start over again, it's just super hard. So walk us through your transition. And once you got the job offer, what happened next?
Sure. Yeah, it was nerve-wracking. As I said, I knew when I got promoted to the senior supervisory special agent level, I knew that it was putting me in that risky territory where, you don't know what the next administration is going to do when it's a political office like that. So I knew when a new attorney general came in, there was a good chance they would bring their own senior staff. And as I said, I'm not one to kind of wait around and see what happens. So I wanted to be proactive. I mean, I have kids and a husband and, bills to pay and things like that. So I couldn't just wait around to see if I was going to be let go. I figured I had learned all these new skill sets. I had one of the last managers I had at the Attorney General's office. He really pushed his teams to really think outside the box. And I think that was really different for law enforcement. It really made me look at things from a different perspective. And instead of kind of always doing things the way we had always done them, it kind of broadened my horizons a lot. So when I started looking for private sector opportunities and seeing how much more was out there in the world, and how, when I went from a local police department to the Attorney General's office, I'm like, man, I'm going from 13 square miles to now the whole state of Pennsylvania. This is so much space I get to work in. So then the idea of going from Pennsylvania to the whole globe to a global company, I'm like, oh my gosh, the possibilities are endless. There's so much more I could do. So I was pretty excited. I was nervous to leave because you said as soon as you walk out that door is kind of shut behind you. All your certifications expire, wiretap certifications, things like that. The minute you leave, you'd have to go through all those schools again. Man, I was nervous. I was fortunate that you only needed to be there 10 years to vest, and I had been there 10 years and 1 month. So the timing kind of worked out perfect. I was able to retire. 10 years was considered fully retired. So I retired, took my, shortened pension, and just said, what, I have to see what else is out there. I was fortunate that WeWork worked out. I was super excited to go work for the global head of security there. My meetings with him went great. I could tell he was very forward thinking. His approach to what he wanted to build. WeWork didn't have an existing security team yet. They had a couple of people in some key positions, and he was filling out kind of the rest of his roster to really build out WeWork's global security structure. So it was exciting to think about the potential there and this company that's up and coming, and it was really starting to pick up speed in its growth. It wasn't quite hyper growth yet. There was about 100 buildings globally when I joined, but when I left 2.5 years later, there were 600. So we added, such a huge footprint in that time span. So knowing what was coming and knowing what the potential was, I was nervous to leave, but I was so, excited about the opportunity in front of me and to learn new things and to learn things that I hadn't learned before. And I wouldn't even have the opportunity to learn if I stayed in a smaller state agency or a medium-sized state agency. So I was nervous. It was nerve-wracking to walk out the door. And I knew that I had taken a position that I didn't know everything about. I mean, I hadn't done physical security operations. I didn't know anything about alarm systems. or CCTV or things like that. And that was part of what was going to fall under me in this new role. Investigations and intel, I felt pretty confident about that. I knew there'd be some things that have to tweak to fit, the private sector, but I was more nervous about some of the security operations stuff.
Well, so some attributes you brought up from law enforcement that prepared you for the private sector were your willingness to take risks in leaving one department to a bigger department. And ultimately, your biggest risk was taking the, I would say, administrative position where you're no longer in a union and you're beholden to an administration. If there's a new administration that comes in, you could lose your job. So that's a huge risk. And you timed it probably perfectly to go, well, I'm going to hit my 10-year mark so I can at least have the security of a half pension.
Right.
But that experience to take that risks, I think, helped you jump, go to WeWork, and you built a successful program there for what you were brought into. Tell us about the opportunity at GitHub as being the head of security. Like, how did that materialize? And tell us more about the role that you have today.
Sure. I think that's a big part of that's both nerve-wracking and somewhat exhilarating is taking those risks. And they've come up again and again throughout my career. And every time, I've come home and said to my husband, I'm like, I don't know, man, I don't know about this. I'm a little bit scared. And every time he's like, just do it. What do you have to lose? Like, really, what do you have to lose? You'll find another job if it doesn't work out. So I think having, that support at home and having somebody to kind of give me that push and then just sucking it up and stepping off that ledge has what's led from one thing to another, being the one that's willing to raise my hand and be like, all right, I'll try this new thing, or I'll do this new thing, or you want to build an intel team? Like, all right, I don't really know what I'm doing. I took a couple of classes, but I'll try it. And that's what's being like, I don't know, having that little bit of courage to be able to just try it and see what happens has what's led me to grow and progress throughout my career. It was hard to go to WeWork. WeWork was great. It was crazy during the time I was there. I worked with some really, really good people, but the company grew so fast in the time I was there. And global security as a team got handed between different functions. They couldn't really figure out as a company, it was scaling so fast. They didn't really know what to do with the security team. Learned a ton about security operations, about crisis management, about a ton of different how to really provide that kind of customer service to the private sector, which was a little bit different than law enforcement, right? Learning how to support a business rather than enforce laws, how to really apply these skills. It really was a great learning experience, but I gotten to the point after 2.5 years where I didn't feel like there was a lot of shifting around, but there wasn't kind of any forward movement available for me. So I started again, kind of looking to see what else was out there in the universe and to see if I would come across something that would be interesting. Interestingly, WeWork paid for coaching for all their female employees. And I met with a coach and we started talking about career development. And I was saying that, I feel like I'm kind of stifled here. Like I want to keep growing. I want to keep learning and developing. And I feel like I don't really have the opportunity to do that. So we started talking about transitioning to or looking for other opportunities that would provide me with that kind of level of growth. Again, I was nervous because I was content where I was at. It was a good company. This was all pre-IPO. So it looked like it was going to take off and, be this miracle unicorn and I'd be able to ride my shares off into the sunset for retirement. So I was nervous, but I started looking that the coach really helped me identify what I wanted in a company. And so it really helped kind of narrow down the field because I was thinking like, all right, I'll just start applying for jobs and see what else is out there. And I blasted all these applications out there. And then my resume is good. Now I learned how to fix what I did wrong the first time around. I'm like, why am I really not getting a lot of calls back? And then the calls back that I did get, the interviews were all over the place. I was interviewing for, professional sports security team roles as, running their intel teams. And I was interviewing for security operations roles. And it was just for small companies. It was all over the place. And the coach is like, what are you doing? Like, narrow down what you want to do, figure out what kind of company you want to work for and focus your search on that. And like, find a company that you believe in their values. And that was a game changer for me. So I stopped just blasting resumes off into the universe. And I really started looking for roles for that I thought would be interesting for me. And one of the things I really liked about WeWork is that, I came in early in the security team and we got to build something from the ground up, and we got to figure out what does security look like and how can we offer security as a service to our employees and the other people we worked with. How could we, look for opportunities to make it a business enabler to support the business, but maybe even try and find a way to offer it as a service to customers, things like that. There was just a lot of different angles that we got to approach it from and really think about security in a different light. And I liked that. So I knew that I wanted to find a security team that was still early on, not a company that had been around. Even if the company had been around for a while, maybe the security team hadn't been around for a while. So I started looking for opportunities like that. And I knew that I wanted to work for a company that kind of aligned with the same morals and values that I had. And I found a job description for GitHub, where I work now. As you mentioned, it's a software coding platform. And the job description was like perfect. It was building a security team from the ground up. I would be the first person on their security team. They had no established security function yet. And the company, I started researching the company. The morals of the company were like right on. I'm like, all right, this is the right size company. It hasn't been around that long. They want to build a brand new team, and they're looking for somebody with the skill set that I had acquired over the last few years. So I was just like, all right, let's try it again. So I sent my resume out. I did the same thing I did before since it worked last time. And I sent a LinkedIn message right to the person that would go on to be my manager. And I was like, well, we'll see what happens. We'll see what the universe has in store now. And I was lucky. I got a call back. I got an interview. They flew me out to San Francisco. I was listed actually out of San Francisco, but I applied anyway because I figured, let's see what happens. I don't know if I wanted to move to San Francisco, but I figured I would see what they said. And man, I was super fortunate because they were open to be in a remote role. So which I didn't know at the time. But I ended up being able to work remotely from Pennsylvania, which has been great.
Wow. So you get to work for a large technical company like GitHub, which is based in San Francisco, as their head of security, the head honcho, working from Pennsylvania. Isn't that amazing? And this was before COVID, correct?
Yeah, this is before COVID. So I started in July of 2019. I think my experience at WeWork really helped a lot because our security team was dispersed there too. We had a group of us that worked in New York, but I lived in Pennsylvania. So I only went to New York 1 or 2 days a week. In the beginning I went a lot until I kind of got settled. And then I started easing off and I would only go to New York 1 or 2 days a week. So it really helped me be able to see and explain how you could run a global security function and you don't all need to be sitting in the same room. So
yeah, this is something I'm very passionate about the remote working and the unconscious bias of remote working pre-COVID-19. Before that, there are some people feel if you're not in the office, you're not working. If we can't physically see you, you're not working. Well, with this remote work environment where the entire globe is working remotely and still functioning very well with technology, it makes it easier to have these agile roles where you can be an executive leader in security working remotely and be effective thousands and thousands of miles away. So let's walk through the building of another global security team for GitHub. What lessons have you learned? You had the WeWork experience. Now you're at this San Francisco startup and you had to build this team. Can you walk our listeners through your process? And then what does your team look like today? Did you leverage your network on LinkedIn to find other talent or just connections?
Sure. So I was fortunate. GitHub was about 70% remote. Their employees were about 70% remote before I even started there. So they've always been kind of a remote first company. So I think it made it a lot easier for me to make the kind of argument that I could do this job remotely and that I can, provide the level of service they're looking for and be what the leadership team needs me to be and my team to be. I think being able to make that argument also made it easier for me to hire remote staff. So when I was looking to fill out my team, I came in, I spent the first 6 months kind of assessing what we needed, what was already in place, what did we need to get in place to kind of build out our security team. I leveraged my LinkedIn network heavily when I first started there because I hadn't worked in San Francisco before. I've always lived on the East Coast. I hadn't built a security team all by myself before either. I'd been a part of building out WeWorks, but this is my first time doing it solo. So I got right on LinkedIn and started reaching out to anybody that would answer me, essentially, anybody that was a head of global security for a similar sized company. So I reached out to all different people and I got responses from about 90% of the people I just completely cold called, reach out to and said, hey, I see you're head of global security for such and such company. Your size company is about the same. The structure's sort of similar. Some weren't even similar. Some were, in the orthodontics business and stuff like that. But, I knew they had multiple locations throughout the globe and they were just building their team. And I said, I'm building this team. I want to benchmark and see how you did it, what your thoughts were, what you did right, what you did wrong. And like I said, about 90% of the people reached right back out to me on LinkedIn and said, sure, send me your information. I'm happy to hop on a call with you. So I spent part of my first 6 months just basically, like you said, cold calling people on LinkedIn and being like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Tell me how you did it, and what you learned from it. So I can learn from your lessons and not have to go. And I was so happy to see and really kind of surprised how willing people are to help you do it and help you not make the mistakes that they made and help you learn from their experiences. It really helped speed up the process of building out my team. When it was time to build out my team, I reached back out to a couple of the people that I worked with at WeWork and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. They knew what they had done before and what their work ethic was. So it made it easy to just kind of see if they were interested in building something new again, kind of going through it. It was a lot of work building out WeWork security team. So I didn't know if people want to do it again. Like the startup stuff is no joke. It's a lot, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. But yeah, I was fortunate that, when I had these openings and I put them out there, shared some of them on LinkedIn, got a lot of interest that way. And now we just hired our 5th person. So building out my team slowly but surely, which isn't bad for a year and a half. Starting out, I had no head count and now I'll be up to 5 people next week.
So for the law enforcement, people are still in law enforcement that don't work in corporate. You need to understand when Avril's talking about she just got 5 people, you're probably thinking like, oh, geez, what a small team. That doesn't include the hundreds and hundreds of contractors that are doing a lot of the work, right? But a FTE, as we call it, or full-time employee, is literally like asking your higher ups for a body part, right? Like it's so hard to get, and you have to really have a good business justification. Why would you bring in a full-time employee to do this particular role? So for a startup, 5 FTEs is in such a short period of time is amazing, and you'll continue to grow. But what I think what you're going to help our listeners here is understand the path and direction you took. You were somewhat entrepreneurial in a way. You didn't become your own boss like Des Smith, whose company he built, but you were entrepreneurial within startups, and you like that. You love being able to build something. And if that's in your DNA, then continue to do that. One thing I tell a lot of people I coached over the years was, if you want monumental growth or exponential growth over a period of time in an opportunity, then you need to go to a company that's starting off, or they did not have a security group and you're going to build it. However, it's going to be completely chaotic. You have to be able to stomach it. Now, if you're not used to that kind of risk or that level, then stick to the more traditional companies that have been around for a long time, that has a very established security team. However, with that kind of secure position, you're going to have limited upward mobility and growth. So you just have to decide where you're at. I'm a former narcotics detective. I've been in dicey situations just like you were, Avril. So I'm a risk taker also, hence why I left mid-career without even a pension. And it just decides where you are in your career path. And everyone out listening out there, you're in a different area in your career. You just have to decide where I'm going to go. But as we conclude and as we wrap up, I heard several themes that are very important for your next adventure or journey into a career, is just having that network, and then being thoughtful on who you reach out to, but also be ready. I feel you got callbacks because how you articulated your ping or the message to who you're reaching out to, and whatever you had in there was appealing enough for them to give you that call. Because trust me, I get thousands of requests on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're starting to become a kind of a social influencer on LinkedIn also, and you just don't have the time to reach back to everyone. And that's the power of this show, the Cop to Corporate show. So we can reach the masses with a video of tips and tricks on how to expand. So as we wrap it up, could you just tell our listeners, did you find, what were the biggest differences culturally in the private sector versus public sector?
Oh, well, for me, I mean, that was a chaotic change too, because I went from working for a law enforcement agency to WeWork. So if you're not familiar with WeWork, I mean, you can Google it and you'll find the articles about sort of the chaos there. But I mean, I went from working in law enforcement to a company that had a bar in the office, and we had whiskey drinking at 5 o'clock every day as part of the normal day, and we had a summer camp that we were required to go to, and they flew the whole company to London, and we camped in a field in a tent in the freezing cold for 3 days while a rave basically went on around us. So it was pretty chaotic, and it was a big change culturally from working. There was just a lot less, I want to say like a lot less rules. There was no SOPs, right? You come into a police department, the SOPs have been there forever. You know what the rule book is, how it can work in your favor, and how they can use it to jam you up. You go to a company, especially a startup like WeWork, where there really isn't rules yet, and then you're the one that gets to write them. That it's fun, but it takes a little bit to kind of find your grounding and figure out what does that company want those rules to look like, and what can you expect? What sort of response can you expect? A lot of people have different opinions about, especially now, what law enforcement is. And so getting used to some people being a little leery about even working with you because they have a different opinion about law enforcement and what your job was. I mean, I've always felt like it's an honorable profession. My intent has always been, even now in the private sector, has been to help people and keep people safe. Not everybody views law enforcement like that. So getting kind of used to that cultural shift, that not everybody's receptive to you being there, that was different. It was a big difference, but I mean, it's been a fun ride.
Well,
you just have to be open. You have to be open to those opportunities.
Right. Well, thanks for bringing up the divide, I guess, for people working in corporate that do not know any officers or law enforcement. And if we're the face and we're law enforcement, former law enforcement, public safety coming into the corporate, that's where we can kind of bridge the gap and educate on both sides, right? And they'll be like, wow, Avril, she's pretty normal. She's a great person. You don't come across as a cop, because most people see just snippets and sound bites, and then they come up with their own conclusion of what law enforcement really is. And we're a former law enforcement. We're human beings, just like everyone else, and we enjoy our family, our off time. We are quirky, but we love doing the right thing. We love helping people. And so once again, thank you, Avril. For those of you out there that aren't connected with me on LinkedIn, please connect with Avril. Start following her blog. She's starting a blog about life after law enforcement. And then if you're not subscribed to the Cop to Corporate YouTube channel, please subscribe. And until the next episode, I wish everyone the best, and thank you.